that I think might work out. I know I don't have anyone here yet, so I feel confident in going right over here. I went kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I needed a computer, and so I bought one, and I'm going to attempt now to figure out if I can go onto YouTube from here and share this live stream with my Facebook. So let's see if I think I have to sign in. So I got this lovely computer because I needed one, but I bought it on credit. Okay, let's see. Do you want to reinstall the update? No, I don't want to do that. Let's see. I don't want to do that. I want to go, okay, I'm not very good with computers, so I'm going to put this aside and just let it go. Hello, Dee. How are you, my darling friend? Lovely to see you. Actually, thank you for reminding me. I would like to take this time right now to thank my top tier patrons. Dee Lucaro, Mary Jane King, Lauren Morgan Richards. Zaisha has been a recent upgrade. If you would like to join my friends who support the arts and what I do, then you can meet me at patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. It should be easily pulled up. It was formerly The Gentleman's House. We changed that so that it would be a little easier to be found. So I don't know how to use this computer yet. I am technologically disadvantaged, to put it politely. I'm kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Well, for that reason, I'm actually, I've missed you too, my darling. Lovely to see you. I've been away, as you know, because I was traveling across country and things were on hold, and so yes, lots of changes are being made, positive changes, good things for everyone involved. It's been quite a ride. I am getting as you see, I've gotten part of the room painted. Good evening, Mary Jane. Lovely to see you. So I've gotten part of the room painted. I still have the whole ceiling to do, so you can't see what I'm looking at. Hello, Jabneel Flores. Good evening. Good evening. After a little bit, I won't be able to comment on the questions and the responses because I will have my nose in a book. Hello, Malika. Good to see you. So many lovely faces, so many wonderful names that I recognize, know, and love. Raven, hello. I'm doing very well. Good evening. Good evening. So, as you know, I have started painting. I'm going to paint the ceiling, and it's going to be a mix. So there's a lot of different layers of time. There are things that are Empire, Second Empire, Napoleon III, some things that are even a little Louis the 15th rather, excuse me. And then there are things that are 18th, 19th, and then we've got things that are 20th century. So we've got things like some of these lamps are 20th century, and then there's going to be on the ceiling, it's going to be the same color blue, this blue-green, I like to call it, and there's going to be a starburst in self-adhesive strips like you can get for molding. It's going to be fabulous. It'll be in gold. It'll radiate throughout the room. Then, of course, I've got those pale green curtains. I'm wondering, though, now that I'm looking, if I can dye them. I don't know. I might. They match the chairs, but I think I kind of want to go either. I don't know. You know, fantasy world and creation and things that I stay awake at night and dream of. It's been one of those weird things since I was a child that I would create and design in my head, and the only way that I could bring it out. Oh, I wish I had them handy. I would show you some of the drawings that my dear sweet mother saved of mine from when I was a child. I was a strange kid. So I would design these elaborate French, Victorian, sort of eclectic rooms, and that's what. So I'm having a good time. I'm really enjoying sort of the creation process. I'm loving it. It really is. It makes me feel alive. Now, when the next couple of rooms I've got to do, I know that I have to do my seance room, which is right there behind this fireplace mantle, because ideally that's where I'll be filming. Thank you, Malika. I had a wonderful and relaxing day. It was really lovely. I finally have internet, which is good because I'm not using my data anymore. Hello, Liz. Good to see you. Lovely to see you, Liz. So yeah, the internet guy came today, and what else did I do? Oh, I had an interview with my very good friend Patty Negri. You would know her from Ghost Adventures. She has a podcast called The Witching Hour, so look for that one. That one will be coming out soon. And then I had a call with another project that I can't really talk about yet, but it was a good call. Thank you. Good to see you too. Lovely, lovely. So I'm just going to fill a couple of minutes so that we can make certain that we get more people to come in, more people to see, because I love to read to you. So what I do here is to promote literacy. It is to help people to sleep. It is also sort of a break from the chaos of the modern world, and we get to read these classic novels. There's that. What else was I going to say? I guess, well, that's about it. So I guess without further ado, we will go ahead and continue reading Murder on the Orient Express. Part 3. Hercule Poirot sits back and thinks. 1. Which of them? Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine were talking together when Poirot entered the dining car. Monsieur Bouc looked depressed. Le voilà, said the latter when he saw Poirot. Then he added as his friend sat down. If you solve this case, mon cher, I shall indeed believe in miracles. It worries you, this case? Naturally it worries me. I cannot make head or tail of it. I agree, said the doctor. He looked at Poirot with interest. To be frank, he said, I cannot see what you are going to do next. No, said Poirot thoughtfully. He took out his cigarette case and lit one of his tiny cigarettes. His eyes were dreamy. That, to me, is the interest of this case, he said. We are cut off from all the normal routes of procedure. Are these people whose evidence we have taken speaking the truth or lying? We have no means of finding out except such means as which we can devise ourselves. It is an exercise, this of the brain. This is all very fine, said Monsieur Bouc, but what have you got to go upon? I told you just now, we have the evidence of the passengers and the evidence of our own eyes. Pretty evidence, that of the passengers. It told us just nothing at all. Poirot shook his head. I do not agree, my friend. The evidence of the passengers gave us several points of interest. Indeed, said Mr. Bouc skeptically. I did not observe it. That is because you did not listen. Well, tell me, what did I miss? I will just take one instance. The first evidence we heard, that of the young McQueen. He uttered, to my mind, one very significant phrase. About the letters? No, not about the letters. As far as I can remember, his words were, we travelled about. Monsieur Ratchet wanted to see the world. He was hampered by knowing no languages. I acted more as a courier than a secretary. He looked from the doctor's face to that of Monsieur Bouc. What? You still do not see? That is inexcusable. For you had a second chance again just now when he said, "You are apt to be down if you speaking nothing but good American." You mean, Monsieur Bouc? Still puzzled. Ah, is that what you want? It given to you in words of one syllable. Well, here it is. Monsieur Rachet spoke no French. Yet, when the conductor came in answer to his bell last night, it was his voice speaking in French that told him that it was a mistake and that he was not wanted. It was, moreover, a perfectly idiomatic phrase that was used, not one that a man knowing only a few words of French would have selected. Ce n'est rien, je me suis trompé. It is true, cried Constantine excitedly. We should have seen that. I remember your laying stress on the words when you repeated them to us. Now I understand your reluctance to rely upon us the evidence of the dented watch. Already, at 23 minutes to 1, Ratchet was dead. And it was his murderer speaking French. And it was his murderer speaking French, finished Monsieur Bouc impressively. Pierrot raised a depreciating hand. Let us not go too fast. And do not let us assume more than we actually know. It is safe, I think, to say that at the time, 23 minutes to 1, some other person was in Ratchet's compartment, and that person was either French or could speak the French language fluently. You are very cautious, mon vieux. One should advance only a step at a time. We have no actual evidence that Ratchet was dead at that time. There is the cry that awakened you. Yes, that is true. In one way, said Monsieur Bouc thoughtfully, this discovery does not affect things very much. You heard someone moving about next door. That someone was not Ratchet, but the other man. Doubtless, he was washing blood from his hands, clearing up after the crime, burning the incriminating letter. Then he waits till all is still. And when he thinks it is safe and the coast is clear, he locks and chains Ratchet's door on the inside, unlocks the communicating door into Mrs. Hubbard's compartment and slips out that way. In fact, it is exactly as we thought, with the difference that Ratchet was killed about half an hour earlier, and the watch put into 1:15 to create an alibi. Not such a famous alibi, said Perrault. The hands of the watch pointed to 1:15, the exact time when the intruder actually left the scene of the crime. True, said Monsieur Bouc, a little confused. What then does the watch convey to you? If the hands were altered, I say if, then the time at which they were set must have a significance. The natural reaction would be to suspect anyone who had reliable alibi for the time indicated in this case, 1:15. Yes, said the doctor. That reasoning is good. We must also pay a little attention to the time the intruder entered the compartment, when he had the opportunity of doing so, unless we are to assume the complicity of the real conductor. There was only one time when he could have done so, during the time the train stopped at Vinkovy. After the train left Vinkovy, the conductor was sitting facing the corridor, and whereas any one of the passengers would pay little attention to the wagon attendant, the one person who would notice an impostor would be the real conductor. But during the halt of Vinkovy, the conductor is out of the platform. The coast is clear. And by our former reasoning, it must be one of the passengers, said Monsieur Bouc. We come back to where we were. Which of them? Perrault smiled. I made a list, he said. If you like to see it, it will perhaps refresh your memory. The doctor, and Monsieur Bouc pored over the list together. It was written out neatly in a methodical manner in order in which the passengers had been interviewed. Hector McQueen, American subject, berth number 6, second class. Motive, possibly arising out of association with the dead man. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m., midnight to 1:30 vouched for by Colonel Arbuthnot, and 1:15 to 2 vouched for by the conductor. Evidence against him? None. Suspicious circumstances? None. Conductor Pierre Michel, French subject. Motive? None. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m., seen by H.P. in corridor at the same time as voice spoke from Ratchet's compartment at 12:37, from 1 a.m. to 1:16, vouched for by other two conductors. Evidence against him? None. Suspicious circumstances. The wagon-lit uniform found is a point in his favor, since it seems to have been intended to throw suspicion on him. Edward Masterman, English subject, berth number 4, second class. Motive, possibly arising out of connection with deceased, whose valet he was. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m., vouched for by Antonio Forcelli. Evidence against him or suspicious circumstances? None, except that he is the only man the right height or size to have worn the wagon-lit uniform. On the other hand, it is unlikely that he speaks French well. Mrs. Hubbard, American subject, berth number 3, first class. Motive? None. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m.? None. Evidence against her or suspicious circumstances? Story of man in her compartment is substantiated by the evidence of Hardman and that of the woman Schmidt. Greta Olsen, Swedish subject, berth number 10, second class. Motive? None. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m., vouched for by Mary Debnam. Note, was last to see Ratchet alive. Princess Dragmarov, naturalized French subject, berth number 14, first class. Motive, was intimately acquainted with Armstrong family and godmother to Sonia Armstrong. Alibi, from midnight to 2 a.m., vouched for by conductor and maid. Evidence against her or suspicious circumstances? None. Count Andreani, Hungarian subject, diplomatic passport, berth number 13, first class. Motive? None. Alibi, midnight, 2 a.m., vouched for by conductor. This does not cover period from 1 to 1:15. Countess Andreani, as above, berth number 12, motive? None. Alibi, midnight, 2 a.m., took Trional and slept, vouched for by husband, Trional bottle in her cupboard. Colonel Arbuthnot, British subject, berth number 15, first class. Motive? None. Alibi, midnight, 2 a.m., talked with McQueen till 1:30, went down to own compartment, and did not leave it. Substantiated by McQueen and conductor. Evidence against him or suspicious activity? Pipe cleaner. Cyrus Hardman, American subject, berth number 16, second class. Motive? None known. Alibi, midnight to 2 a.m., did not leave compartment, substantiated by McQueen and conductor. Evidence against him or suspicious circumstances? None. Antonio Forcelli, American subject, Italian birth, berth number 5, second class. Motive? None known. Alibi, midnight, 2 a.m., vouched for by Edward Masterman. Evidence against him or suspicious circumstances? None, except that weapon used might be said to suit his temperament. Vide Monsieur Bouc. Mary Debnam, British subject, berth number 11, second class. Motive? None. Alibi, midnight to 2 a.m., vouched for by Greta Olsen. Evidence against her or suspicious circumstances? Conversation overheard by H.P. and her refusal to explain the same. Hildegard Schmidt, German subject, berth number 8. Second class. Motive? None. Alibi? Midnight 2 a.m. vouched for by conductor and her mistress. Went to bed, was aroused by conductor at 12:38 approximately, and went to mistress. Note, the evidence of the passengers is supported by the statement of the conductor that no one entered or left Monsieur Ratchet's compartment between the hours of midnight to 1 o'clock, when he himself went into the next coach, and from 1:15 to 2 o'clock. That document, you understand, said Perrault. It is mere précis of the evidence we held, arranged that way for convenience. With a grimace, Monsieur Bouc handed it back. It is not illuminating, he said. Perhaps you may find this more your taste, said Perrault, with a slight smile as he handed him a second sheet of paper. 2. 10 questions. On the paper was written, things needing explanation. Number 1. The handkerchief marked with the initial H, whose is it? Number 2. The pipe cleaner, was it dropped by Colonel Arbuthnot or by someone else? Number 3. Who wore the scarlet kimono? Number 4. Who was the man or woman masquerading in wagon-lit uniform? Number 5. Why do the hands of the watch point to 1:15? Was the murder committed at that time? Number 6. Number 7. Was it earlier? Number 8. Was it later? Can we be sure that Ratchet was stabbed by more than one person? Number 10. What other explanation of his wounds can there be? Well, let us see what we can do, said Monsieur Bouc, brightening a little at this challenge to his wits. The handkerchief to begin with. Let us by all means be orderly and methodical. Assuredly, said Perrault, nodding his head in satisfied fashion. Mr. Bouc continued, somewhat didactically. The initial H is connected with 3 people, Mrs. Hubbard, Miss Debenham, whose second name is Hermione, and the maid Hildegard Schmidt. Ah, and of those 3? It is difficult to say, but I think I should vote for Miss Debenham. For all one knows, she may be called by her second name and not her first. Also, there is already some suspicion attaching to her. That conversation you overheard, mon cher, was certainly a little curious, and so is her refusal to explain it. As for me, I plumped the American, said Dr. Constantine. It is a very expensive handkerchief, and Americans, as all the world knows, do not care what they pay. So, you both eliminate the maid? Asked Perrault. Yes, as she herself said, it is the handkerchief of a member of the upper classes. And the second question, the pipe cleaner, did Colonel Arbuthnot drop it, or did somebody else? That is more difficult, the English. They do not stab. You're right there. I incline to view that someone else dropped the pipe cleaner and did so to incriminate the long-legged Englishman. As you said, Monsieur Perrault. Put in the doctor. 2 clues is too much carelessness. I agree with Monsieur Bouc. The handkerchief was a genuine oversight, hence no one will admit that it is theirs. The pipe cleaner is a faked clue. In support of that theory, you notice that Colonel Arbuthnot shows no embarrassment and admits freely to smoking a pipe and using that type of cleaner. You reason well, said Perrault. Question number 3. Who wore the scarlet kimono? Went on Monsieur Bouc. As to that, I would confess I have not the slightest idea. Have you any views on the subject, Dr. Constantine? None. Then we confess ourselves beaten there. The next question has, at any rate, possibilities. Who was the man or woman masquerading in the wagon-lit uniform? Well, one can say with certainty a number of people whom it could not have been. Hardman, Colonel Arbuthnot, Foricelli, Count Andrani, and Hector McQueen are all too tall. Mrs. Hubbard, Hildegard Schmidt, and Greta Olson are too broad. That leaves the valet, Miss Debenham, Princess Dragmaroff, and Countess Andrani. And none of them sounds likely. Greta Olsen in one case and Antonio Foscarelli in the other both swear that Miss Debenham and the valet never left their compartments. Hildegard Schmidt swears to the princess being in hers, and Count Andreni has told us that his wife took a sleeping draught, therefore it seems impossible that it can be anybody, which is absurd. As our old friend Euclid says, murmured Perrault. It must be one of those four, said Dr. Constantine, unless it is someone from outside who has found a hiding place, and that, we agreed, was impossible. Monsieur Bouc had passed on the next question to the list. Number 5. Why do the hands of the broken watch point to 1:15? I can see two explanations for that. Either it was done by the murderer to establish an alibi, and afterwards he was prevented from leaving the compartment when he meant to do so by hearing people moving about, or else, wait, I have an idea coming. The other two waited respectfully while Monsieur Bouc struggled in mental agony. I have it, he said at last. It was not the wagon-lit murderer who tampered with the watch. It was the person we have called the second murderer, the left-handed person. In other words, the woman in the scarlet kimono. She arrives later and moves back the hands of the watch in order to make an alibi for herself. Bravo, said Dr. Constantine. It is well imagined that. In fact, said Perrault, she stabbed him in the dark, not realizing that he was already dead, but somehow deduced that he had a watch in his pajama pocket, took it out, put back the hands blindly, and gave it the requisite dent. Monsieur Bouc looked at him coldly. Have you anything better to suggest yourself, he asked. At the moment, no, admitted Perrault. All the same, he went on, I do not think you have either of you appreciated the most interesting point about that watch. Does question number 6 deal with it? Asked the doctor. To that question, was the murder committed at the time 1:15? I answer no. I agree, said Monsieur Bouc. Was it earlier? Is the next question. I say yes. You too, doctor? The doctor nodded. Yes, but the question, was it later, can also be answered in the affirmative. I agree with your theory, Monsieur Bouc, and so I think does Monsieur Perrault, although he does not wish to commit himself. The first murderer came earlier than 1:15. The second murderer came after 1:15. And as regards the question of the left-handedness, ought we not take steps to ascertain which of the passengers is left-handed? I have not completely neglected that point, said Perrault. You may have noticed that I made each passenger write either a signature or an address. That is not conclusive, because some people do certain actions with the right hand and others with the left. Some write right-handed but play golf left-handed. Still, it is something. Every person questioned took the pen in their right hand, with the exception of Princess Dragmarov, who refused to write. Princess Dragmarov, impossible, said Monsieur Bouc. I doubt if she would have the strength to inflict that particular left-handed blow, said Dr. Constantine dubiously. That particular wound had been inflicted with considerable force. More force than a woman could use? No, I would not say that, but I think more force than an elderly woman could display, and Princess Dragmarov's physique is particularly frail. It might be a question of the influence of the mind over body. It might be a question of the influence of the mind over the body, said Perrault. Princess Dragmarov was a great personality and immense willpower, but let us pass from that for the moment. To question numbers 9 and 10, can we be sure that Ratchet was stabbed by more than one person? And what other explanation of the wounds can there be? In my opinion, medically speaking, there can be no other explanation of those wounds. To suggest that one man struck first feebly, and then with violence, first with the right hand, then with the left, and after an interval of perhaps half an hour, inflicted flesh wounds upon the dead body. Well, it does not make sense. No, said Perrault. It does not make sense. And you think that two murderers do make sense? As you yourself have said, what other explanation can there be? Poirot stared straight ahead of him. That is what I ask myself, he said. That is what I never cease to ask myself. He leaned back in his seat. From now on, it's all here. He tapped himself on the forehead. We have thrashed it all out. The facts are all in front of us, neatly arranged with order and method. The passengers have sat here one by one, giving their evidence. We know all that can be known from outside. He gave an affectionate smile at Monsieur Bouc. It has been a little joke between us, has it not? This business of sitting back and thinking out the truth. Well, I am about to put my theory into practice. Here before your eyes. You two must do the same. Let us all three close our eyes and think. One or more of those passengers killed Ratchet. Which of them? Chapter 3. Curtain suggestive, well, not chapter 3, stave 3, certain suggestive points. It was quite a quarter of an hour before anyone spoke. Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine had started by trying to obey Poirot's instructions. They had endeavored to see through the maze of conflicting particulars to clear an outstanding solution. Monsieur Bouc's thoughts had run something as follows. Assuredly, I must think. But as far as that goes, I have already thought. Poirot obviously thinks this English girl is mixed up in the matter. I cannot help feeling that is most unlikely. The English are extremely cold. Probably it is because they have no figures. But that is not the point. It seems that the Italian could not have done it. A pity. I suppose the English valet is not lying when he said the other never left the compartment. But why should he? It is not easy to bribe the English. They are so unapproachable. The whole thing is most unfortunate. I wonder when we shall get out of this. There must be some rescue work in the progress. They are so slow in these countries. It is hours before anyone thinks of doing anything. And the police of these countries, they will be most trying to deal with, puffed up with importance, touchy on their dignity. They will make the grand affair of all of this. It is not often that such a chance comes their way. It will be in all the newspapers. And from there on, Monsieur Bouc's thoughts went along a well-worn course which they had already traversed some 100 times. Dr. Constantine's thoughts ran thus. He is queer, this little man, a genius or a crank. Will he solve this mystery? Impossible. I can see no way out of it. It is all too confusing. Everyone is lying, perhaps, but even then, that does not help one. If they are all lying, it is just as confusing as if they were all speaking the truth. Odd about those wounds, I cannot understand it. It would be easier to understand if he had been shot, after all. The term gunman must mean that they shoot with a gun. A curious country, America. I should like to go there. It's so progressive. When I get home, I must get hold of Demetrius Zagon. He has been to America. He has all the modern ideas. I wonder what Zia is doing at the moment, if my wife ever finds out. His thoughts went on to entirely private matters. Hercule Poirot sat very still. One might have thought he was asleep, and then, suddenly, after a quarter of an hour complete immobility, his eyebrows began to move slowly up his forehead. A little sigh escaped him. He murmured beneath his breath, "But after all, why not? And if so, why? If so, that would explain everything." His eyes opened. They were green like a cat's, he said softly. "Ah, bien, I have thought. And you?" Lost in their reflections, both men started violently. "I have thought also," said Monsieur Bouc, just a shade guilty, "but I have arrived at no conclusion. The elucidation of crime is your métier, not mine, my friend." "I too have reflected with great earnestness," said the doctor, unblushingly. recall his thoughts from certain pornographic details. I have thought of many possible theories, but not one that really satisfies me. Pierrot nodded amiably. His nod seemed to say, "Quite right. That is the proper thing to say. You have given me the cue I expected." He sat very upright, threw out his chest, caressed his moustache, and spoke in the manner of a practiced speaker addressing a public meeting. "My friends, I have reviewed the facts in my mind, and have also gone over to myself the evidence of the passengers, with this result. I see, nebulously, as yet, a certain explanation that would cover the facts as we know them. It is a very curious explanation, and I cannot be sure as yet that it is true one. To find out definitely, I shall have to make certain experiments. I would like to first mention certain points which appear to me to be suggestive. Let us start with a remark made to me by Monsieur Bouc in this very place on the occasion of the first lunch together on the train. He commented on the fact that we were surrounded by people of all classes, of all ages, of all nationalities. That is a fact somewhat rare in this time of year. The Athens-Paris and the Bucharest-Paris coaches, for instance, are almost empty. Remember also one passenger who failed to turn up. It is, I think, significant that there are some minor points that strike me as suggestive. For instance, the position of Mrs. Aberd's sponge bag, the name of Mrs. Armstrong's mother, the detective methods of Monsieur Hardman, and the suggestion of Monsieur McQueen that Ratchet himself destroyed the charred note we found. Princess Dragmirov's Christian name and grease spot on a Hungarian passport. The two men stared at him. "Do they suggest anything to you, those points?" asked Pierrot. "Not a thing," said Monsieur Bouc frankly. "And Monsieur le Docteur?" "I do not understand the least of what you're talking." Monsieur Bouc, meanwhile, seizing upon one tangible thing his friend had mentioned, was sorting through the passports with a grunt. He picked up that of Count and Countess Andreni and opened it. "Is this what you mean? This dirty mark?" "Yes, it is fairly fresh grease spot. You notice where it occurs?" "At the beginning of the description of Count's wife, her Christian name, to be exact, but I confess that I still do not see the point. I'm going to approach it from another angle. Let us go back to the handkerchief found at the scene of the crime. As we have stated not long ago, 3 people are associated with the letter H. Mrs. Abert, Miss Debnam, and the maid Illigarde Schmidt. Now, let us regard that handkerchief from another point of view. It is, my friends, an extremely expensive handkerchief, an objet de luxe, handmade, embroidered in Paris. Which of the passengers, apart from the initial, was likely to own such a handkerchief? Not Miss Abert, a worthy woman with no pretensions to reckless extravagance in dress. Not Miss Debnam. That class of Englishwoman has a dainty linen handkerchief, but not an expensive wisp of cambric, costing perhaps 200 francs, and certainly not the maid. But there are 2 women on this train who would be likely to own such an handkerchief. Let us see if we can connect them in any way with the letter H. The 2 women I refer to are Princess Dragmirov, whose Christian name is Natalia, put in Monsieur Bouc ironically. Exactly. And her Christian name, as I said just now, is decidedly suggestive. The other woman is Countess Andreini, and at once something strikes us. Me then. Her Christian name on her passport is disfigured by a blob of grease. Just an accident, anyone would say. But consider that Christian name, Elena. Suppose that instead of Elena, it were Helena, that capital H could be turned into the capital E, and then run over the small E next to it is quite easily, and then a spot of grease drop to cover up the alteration. Helena, cried Monsieur Bouc. Now that's an idea, that. Certainly, said an idea. I look about for any confirmation. I have a slight of my idea, and I find it. One of the luggage labels of the Countess's baggage is slightly damp. It is the one that happens to run over the first initial on the top of the case. That label has been soaked off and put on again in different place. You begin to convince me, said Monsieur Bouc. But the Countess and Rainey, surely. Ah, now, Montview, you must turn yourself round and approach it an entirely different angle of the case. How was the murder intended to appear to everybody? Do not forget that the snow has upset all the murderer's original plans. Let us imagine, for a little minute, that there is no snow, that the train proceeded on its normal course. What then would have happened? The murderer, let us say, would still have been discovered in all probability at the Italian frontier early this morning. Much of the same evidence would have been given by the Italian police. The threatening letters would have been produced by Monsieur McQueen. Monsieur Ardman would have told his story. Mrs. Hubbard would have been eager to tell. Mrs. Hubbard would have been eager to tell. Sorry, distractions. Mrs. Hubbard would have been eager to tell how a man passed through her compartment. The button would have been found. I imagine that two things only would have been different. The man would have passed through Mrs. Hubbard's compartment just before 1 o'clock, and the wagon-lit uniform would have been cast off in one of the toilets. You mean? I mean that the murderer was planned to look like an outside job. The assassin would have presumed to have left the train at Broad, where the train is timed to arrive at 58. Somebody would probably have passed a strange wagon-lit conductor in the corridor. The uniform would be left in conspicuous place, so as to show clearly just how the trick had been played. No suspicion would have been attached to the passengers. That, my friend, was how the affair was intended to appear to the outside world. But the accident of the train changes everything. But the accident of the train changes everything. Doubtless we have here the reason why the man remained in the compartment was his victim so long. He was waiting for the train to go on, but at last he realized that the train was not going on. Different plans would have to be made. The murderer would now be known to be still on the train. Yes, said Monsieur Bouc impatiently. I see all that, but where does the handkerchief come in? I am returning to it by somewhat circuitous route. To begin with, you must realize that the threatening letters were in the nature of a blind. They might have been lifted bodily out of an indifferently written American crime novel. They are not real. They are, in fact, simply intended for the police. What we have to ask ourselves is, did they deceive Ratchet? On the face of it, the answer seems to be no. His instructions to Ardman seem to point to his definitive private enemy of the identity of whom he was well aware. That is, if we are to accept Ardman's story as true. But Ratchet certainly received one letter of a very different character, the one containing a reference to the Armstrong baby, a fragment of which we found in his compartment. In case Ratchet had not realized it sooner, this was to make sure that he understood the reason of the threats against his life. That letter, as I have said all along, was not intended to be found. The murderer's first care was to destroy it. This, then, was the second itch in his plans. The first was the snow. The second was our reconstruction of that fragment. That note being destroyed so carefully can only mean one thing. There must be on the train someone so intimately connected with the Armstrong family that the finding of that note would immediately direct suspicion upon that person. Now we come to the other two clues that we have found. I pass over the pipe cleaner. We have already said a good deal about that. Let us pass on to the handkerchief. Taken at its simplest, it is a clue which directly incriminates someone whose initial is H, and it was dropped there unwittingly by that person. Exactly, said Dr. Constantine. She finds out that she has dropped the handkerchief and immediately takes steps to conceal her Christian name. How fast you go! You arrive at conclusion much sooner than I would permit myself to do. Is there any other alternative? Certainly there is. Suppose, for instance, that have committed a crime and wish to cast suspicion for it on someone else. Well, there is on the train a certain person connected intimately with the Armstrong family, a woman. Suppose then that you leave their handkerchief belonging to that woman, she will be questioned. Her connection with the Armstrong family will be brought out. Et voilà, motive, and an incriminating article of evidence. But in such case, objected the doctor, the person indicated, being innocent, would not take steps to conceal her identity. Ah, really? That is what you think. That is truly the opinion of the police court, but I know human nature, my friend, and I tell you that, suddenly confronted with the possibility of being tried for murder, the most innocent person will lose their head and do the most absurd things. No. The grease spot and the changed label do not prove guilt. They only prove that the Countess Andreini is anxious for some reason to conceal her identity. What do you think of her connection with the Armstrong family? She has never been in America, she says. Exactly. And she speaks broken English, and she has very foreign appearance, which she exaggerates. But it should not be difficult to guess who she is. I mentioned just now the name of Mrs. Armstrong's mother. It was Linda Arden. And she was a very celebrated actress, among other things. A Shakespearean actress. Think of it as you like it. The Forest of Arden and Rosalind. It was there she got the inspiration for her acting name, Linda Arden. The name by which she was known all over the world was not a real name. It may have been Goldenberg. She quite likely had Central European blood in her veins, a strain of Jewish perhaps. Many nationalities drift to America. I suggest to you, gentlemen, that the young sister of Mrs. Armstrong's, little more than a child at the time of a tragedy, was Eleanor Goldenberg, the younger daughter of Linda Arden, and that she married Count Andreini when she was an attaché in Washington. But Princess Dragmarov says that she married an Englishman, whose name she cannot remember. I ask you, my friends, is that really likely? Princess Dragmarov loved Linda Arden as great ladies do love great artists. She was godmother to one of her daughters. Would she forget so quickly she married the married name of the other daughter? It is not likely, no. I think we can safely say that Princess Dragmarov was lying. She knew Eleanor was on the train. She had seen her. She realized at once, as soon as she heard who Ratchet really was, that Eleanor would be suspected. And so, when we question her as to the sister, she promptly lies, is vague, cannot remember, but thinks Eleanor married an Englishman. A suggestion as far away from the truth as possible. One of the restaurant attendants came through the door at the end of and approached them. Monsieur Bouc looked at Poirot. The latter nodded. By all means, let dinner be served. The attendant vanished through the doors at the other end. His bell could be heard ringing and his voice upraised. Premier service, le dîner est servi, premier dîner, first service. I think that's where we're going to end for the evening, my darlings. I do hope that you're enjoying our tale of travel and murder and trains and mystery and intrigue. And again, thank you to all of my patrons, even those who give as little as $1 or $2. It adds up. Thank you to my top tier patrons, Dee Lusaro, Mary Jane King, Lauren Morgan Richards, Zaisha. Thank you to those who have donated and helped me out. If you would like to, you can find me on patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. You can find me direct payments through my PayPal under the email rlillard6@gmail.com. And you can find me on Venmo at Richard-Lale-Lillard. Those are great ways of supporting independent artists. As you know, YouTube doesn't pay a whole lot. In fact, I think I've earned pennies from my YouTubes, but I'm so glad to be here. I really am enjoying story time. I would like, as we go on a little bit further, to do it more frequently, if that is possible. I would like to do, I'm working on going maybe twice a week so that we can read more after I'm finished. Now we're about a third of the way through the book. So when we finish this one, and providing, of course, that the rest of my furniture arrives, I have a book that I was originally sharing with my patrons, but it didn't get much attention. So I'm going to bring it back to the public. It's called Hell Up to Date. So I'm going to start with that one, all fresh and new here in the new place. And you're going to love it. It's 1890, and it is a modern day. Could you do it on Friday nights at 8 p.m.? That is a possibility. So Hell Up to Date, 1890, modern day retelling of Dante's Inferno. I think you'll enjoy it. I know I have. The Victorians and all of their devil imagery make me smile. Also, I want to note, I think it's really funny. So I have, not a lot here, but I have a lot of devil imagery dating back, 100 and some odd years, 130 years. And I in my old place, I had someone, oh, thank you so much, I appreciate that. So in my old place, I had shared some of the pictures of, the Pasadena Ritual House that was seen on Ghost Adventures. And someone commented, why all of the devil things? I would take them out and burn them. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to have cherubs? And I commented and I said, well, some places had cherubs, though that cherubs are really more Baroque. These devil images, the imagery of the devil, these are all 19th century, so maybe. At any rate, I really am enjoying our time together. I appreciate you so much. Have a good night, have a good evening. Thank you to all of my friends. Thank you to all of the likes, the comments, and the shares. And please do share. That helps me out tremendously. Share on your Facebooks and your social medias. Get your friends to watch Storytime and all of my videos. You mean the world to me. Thanks so much, and until next time, good night, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it may be. Love to you.